Since time immemorial, we humans have sought ways to transcend the burdens of reality. Life, with all its joys and sorrows, has always carried a weight that presses upon the soul, urging us to seek solace, meaning, and escape. Among the many pathways we have discovered, be it through art, music, faith, or fellowship, there is one companion that has remained steadfastly intertwined with our journey: alcohol. If you sit quietly and think back, you may recall moments when alcohol seemed to play its role in the tapestry of life. A glass of wine at a wedding toast, a bottle of beer during a summer barbecue, or perhaps the sharper, fiery embrace of something stronger on a lonely winter evening. For many of us, alcohol has been present in both the peaks of celebration and the valleys of despair. It is a constant, a cultural thread, binding generations and crossing boundaries. But as I reflect on my own path, a life now mostly lived, I find myself questioning its presence. Not with judgment, but with curiosity. Alcohol, for all its familiarity, is a strange and potent force. What is it that compels us to raise our glasses? What lies behind the liquid in those bottles? In seeking answers, I've found myself drawn not to the here and now but to the stories of those who came before us. The story of alcohol, you see, is not just about a drink. It is about humanity itself, our desires, our flaws, and our unyielding search for something greater. Let us journey back to the ancient world, to a time when humanity first stumbled upon this intoxicating elixir. The Sumerians, those early architects of civilization, revered alcohol as a gift from their gods. They offered beer to the divine in their rituals, believing it bridged the mortal and the eternal. The Egyptians, too, saw wine as sacred, dedicating it to Osiris, the god of renewal. For the Greeks, it was Dionysus, the god of ecstasy, who embodied the wild, liberating spirit of wine. Yet even in these early days, there were whispers of caution. The sages of old warned that alcohol, though divine in its origins, had a dual nature. They spoke of its power to reveal the truth of the soul, but also its ability to obscure reason, to open doors best left closed. These whispers carried across centuries, echoing through cultures and traditions, warning us not of alcohol itself, but of the shadows it casts. As I think back to the many faces I've known, I see those shadows clearly. I've seen friends lose themselves in the warm embrace of drink, only to emerge cold and empty. I've seen families built on love crumble under its weight. And I've seen the light of joy, so bright in the beginning, dimmed by its overuse. But I've also seen another side: moments of connection, laughter, and a fleeting sense of unity. Perhaps that is the secret of alcohol's enduring grip on us. It promises transcendence. It offers a moment where the heaviness of life seems to lift, where the barriers between us dissolve, and we are left with nothing but the raw, unguarded human experience. Yet, as I sit here now, with more years behind me than ahead, I wonder, at what cost? The ancients, wise as they were, understood that alcohol was not a simple substance. It was a spirit, volatile and elusive, capable of extracting the very essence of life. The Arabic word alcohol, from which we derive alcohol, once referred to something intangible, a soul distilled to its purest form. But it also carried a darker meaning, a body-eating spirit. What does that say about us? That we consume something with the power to both elevate and erode? As I sip my tea and look out at the fading sunlight, I am reminded that life, much like alcohol, is a delicate balance. We crave escape. Yet we long for connection. We seek pleasure. Yet we yearn for meaning. And in this dance, alcohol often becomes the partner we both rely on and mistrust. This chapter of humanity's story is not one of condemnation or celebration, but of reflection. I invite you to join me as we delve deeper, to uncover the layers of this complex relationship we share with alcohol. Together, let us explore its history, its power, and its place in our lives, not as a means to judge, but to understand. There's a strange duality to alcohol, isn't there? On one hand, it's familiar, even comforting, a companion at our tables and gatherings. On the other, it is elusive, like a shadow that lingers just beyond our understanding. Over the years, I've come to realize that what we see in a glass of wine or a tumbler of whiskey is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more complex. Something that reaches beyond the physical and touches the spiritual. I remember an evening many years ago, sitting by a crackling fire with an old friend. He poured us each a glass of brandy. And as the amber liquid swirled in the light, he said something that stayed with me: "This stuff can warm your soul or steal it, if you're not careful." At the time, I laughed it off as poetic musings. But as the years went on, I began to see the truth in his words. Alcohol has a way of drawing out what's hidden inside us. In the quiet of that evening, the brandy warmed more than just our bodies, it loosened our tongues and brought to the surface stories we might otherwise have kept buried. For some, it's a balm that soothes the wounds of the day. For others, it's a release, an escape from the weight of emotions too heavy to carry. But for all its seeming simplicity, alcohol does not come without a cost. What I've come to understand, through both observation and reflection, is that alcohol reaches far beyond the physical realm. Scientists can tell us how it affects the liver, the brain, and the nervous system. But what of the unseen? What of the energy it stirs within us, the spirit? If you will, there is a subtle but undeniable shift that occurs when alcohol enters the body. Some call it an opening, a thinning of the veil between our inner selves and the world around us. For some, this feels liberating, a chance to connect more deeply with others or with a long-buried truth. But for others, it can be unsettling, even dangerous. It's as if alcohol not only loosens our inhibitions but also weakens the boundaries that protect us. I've heard it described in different ways by different traditions. Some call it the aura, others the energy field. But the idea is the same: we are more than just flesh and blood. We carry within and around us an invisible force, a kind of spiritual armor that keeps us balanced and connected to something greater. When that field is intact, we feel centered, whole. But when it's disrupted, we become vulnerable. Not just to our own emotions but to influences from the outside. There's a reason why so many ancient teachings speak of alcohol with both reverence and caution. It's a force of transformation. But it's also unpredictable. In the wrong hands or the wrong state of mind, it can tear at the very fabric of our being. I've seen it happen. Not just in the dramatic tales of addiction or despair, but in the quieter moments of disconnection. I once attended a lively gathering, where laughter and clinking glasses filled the room. As the evening wore on, I began to notice a change. The energy shifted, the air growing heavier, as if the joy in the room had been replaced by something more primal. People's voices grew louder, their words less kind. What had started as celebration felt like chaos. I left that night with a lingering unease, wondering why alcohol, which had brought everyone together, had also pulled them apart. Over the years, I've learned to recognize that shift not just in others, But in myself, there were times when a drink felt like a door opening to connection, creativity, or comfort. But there were also times when it felt like a door closing on clarity, on peace, on the deeper truths I sought. What fascinates me is how universal this experience is. Across cultures and centuries, people have observed the dual nature of alcohol. Some have called it a gift from the gods, while others see it as a trickster, offering pleasure with one hand and pain with the other. And maybe it's both. Maybe it's neither. What I do know is that it's not just a drink. It's a mirror, reflecting not only our desires but also our fears. As I look back on my own encounters with alcohol, I realize how much it has taught me not just about itself, but about myself. It's shown me my vulnerabilities, my tendencies to seek escape, and my moments of courage. It has also reminded me that the power it holds is not inherent in the liquid but in the choices we make when we encounter it. So here's the question I've come to ask: what does alcohol reveal to us? And what does it obscure? And perhaps more importantly, what do we hope to find or avoid when we reach for that glass? The answers, I think, are as personal as the lives we've lived. But in exploring them, we begin to see alcohol not as a simple indulgence or vice but as a force to be understood, a shadow in the glass, waiting to show us what lies within. As I sit by the window, watching the amber hues of the setting sun spill across the horizon, I'm reminded of a conversation I once had with a man I deeply respected. He was a decorated veteran, a man who had seen more of the world's beauty and brutality than most. Over a quiet dinner one evening, he poured himself a whiskey and said, "This here, it's like a ticket to freedom. Isn't it? Just one sip. And for a little while, everything feels lighter." I nodded, though I wasn't quite sure I understood. Back then, freedom seemed simple: the absence of burdens, the ability to do as one pleased. But as time went on, I realized freedom is far more complicated. And for many, alcohol appears to offer an escape, a fleeting sense of liberation from the weight of living. I've felt it myself. Perhaps you have, too. That first sip on a particularly hard day, when the world feels heavy and the edges of life seem too sharp, alcohol steps in like an old friend, promising relief, loosening the knots of worry and quieting the hum of stress. In those moments, it feels like a gift, an oasis in a desert of responsibilities. But as I've grown older, I've come to see this promise for what it often is: an illusion. Alcohol, for all its warmth and comfort, doesn't truly free us. It distracts us, perhaps, or numbs us. It offers a reprieve, but not release. And when the effects fade, the burdens return, often heavier than before. I once met a woman, let's call her Evelyn, who taught me a great deal about this illusion. She was in her 70s. A widow who lived alone in a modest house filled with memories of a long and full life. Evelyn was the kind of person who could light up a room with her stories. But there was a sadness beneath her laughter, a shadow she tried to hide. Over time, she confided in me. "I drink a little every evening," she said one night, her voice soft, almost apologetic. "Just enough to take the edge off. It helps me feel less alone." Her words stayed with me. For Evelyn, alcohol wasn't just a drink, it was a way to bridge the gap between herself and the world she had lost. I understood her. I think many of us do. We reach for that glass not just for the taste or the ritual but for the escape it promises. The escape from loneliness, from pain, from the nagging sense that something is missing. And for a time, it works. We feel lighter, freer. But the freedom is fleeting. And the emptiness we sought to escape often deepens. In reflecting on Evelyn's story and my own, I began to see how alcohol offers not freedom, but a facsimile of it. True freedom, I think, is not about running from our burdens but facing them with clarity and strength. It's about finding peace within ourselves, not in something outside of us. The ancient Greeks understood this. They spoke of the unus mundus, the unity of all things, the harmony that exists when we are in tune with the cosmos and our true selves. But alcohol, for all its allure, often takes us further from this unity. It tempts us with the promise of connection. Yet it leaves us more fragmented, more disconnected from the world and from ourselves. I've seen this fragmentation in others. And I've felt it in myself. There were times when a drink seemed to make everything clearer, only for the clarity to dissolve into confusion. Times when alcohol made me feel closer to those around me, only for the closeness to fade into regret or misunderstanding. What fascinates me is how universal this experience is. Across cultures and generations, people have turned to alcohol in search of freedom, connection, and joy. And yet, the ancient warnings remain. The sages and spiritual leaders of old cautioned against the illusions alcohol creates, urging us to seek liberation not in the bottle, but in ourselves. Sitting here now, with the wisdom of years behind me, I see their point more clearly than ever. The freedom alcohol offers is like the light of a match in the dark, bright and beautiful, but brief. True freedom, the kind that lasts, is not found in fleeting pleasures or temporary escapes. It's found in the quiet strength of knowing ourselves, in the courage to face life as it is, without the need to dull its edges. So I ask you, as I've asked myself many times, what are we really seeking when we reach for that glass? And is it something alcohol can truly give us, or is it something we must find within? The answer, I think, lies in the stories we tell ourselves and the choices we make. It's not about judgment or denial, but about understanding. Understanding the difference between the illusion of freedom and the real thing, and having the courage to choose the latter. As the sun dips below the horizon and the world is bathed in twilight, I'm reminded that freedom, like the light, is always there waiting to be found. Not in what we drink, but in who we are. It was a warm spring afternoon many years ago when I found myself sitting in a library, leafing through a worn copy of the Bhagavad Gita. I'd come across it by chance, tucked away on a dusty shelf. As I read, I was struck by the simple yet profound wisdom within its pages. One verse, in particular, stayed with me. A balanced mind is essential for accessing higher planes of consciousness. At the time, I wasn't entirely sure what it meant. But now, as I reflect on the warnings that ancient traditions have given us about alcohol, I begin to understand. Throughout history, the great thinkers and spiritual leaders of the world have shared their thoughts on alcohol, not as a means of condemnation, but as a way to guide us towards something greater. Their words, often written long ago, feel just as relevant today. I remember the first time I heard of the Buddhist teachings on intoxicants. It was during a quiet retreat in the mountains, where an old monk spoke softly to a small group of us. Alcohol clouds the mind, he said. And a clouded mind cannot see the truth. He explained how the Buddha's teachings emphasize clarity, balance, and the ability to observe life as it truly is. When we drink, the monk continued, we invite chaos into the mind. We lose sight of ourselves and our path. At the time, his words felt distant, almost abstract. But as I grew older, I began to see the truth in them. I thought back to times when I had seen alcohol distort the lives of those around me. Friends who once seemed so steady became unpredictable. Their thoughts muddled and their actions rash. Relationships that once felt strong were frayed by words spoken in drunken anger. Words that couldn't be unsaid. And yet, even as these warnings echoed in my mind, I also saw how deeply alcohol is woven into the fabric of our lives. It's there at celebrations, at farewells, at moments of triumph and despair. It's a part of us. For better or worse. But perhaps that's why the warnings are so important. They remind us to approach alcohol not with fear, but with understanding. The Vedic traditions speak of sattva, the quality of purity and harmony. They teach that alcohol diminishes this purity, tipping us instead toward rajas, restless passion, and tamas, ignorance and darkness. It's not that alcohol is inherently evil, but that it disrupts the delicate balance within us. I saw this firsthand with a man named James, a neighbor of mine when I was younger. James was a man of incredible kindness and intellect. He loved books, music, and deep conversations about the meaning of life. But he also loved his evening whiskey. A love that grew over the years until it overshadowed everything else. I remember visiting him one evening, finding him sitting alone with a half-empty bottle. His eyes, once so bright and sharp, were dulled. "It helps me think," he told me, though his voice carried the weight of something unsaid. Over time, I watched as the man who had once seemed so full of life became a shadow of himself. Consumed not by the alcohol itself, but by the escape it offered. It wasn't until years later that I read the words of St. Augustine, who described drunkenness as a form of self-destruction of the soul. Augustine, like so many others, warned that alcohol can pull us away from introspection, from prayer, from the connection to something greater than ourselves. As I thought of James, those words rang painfully true. But not all traditions view alcohol so darkly. In the Christian Eucharist, wine becomes a symbol of Christ's blood, a sacred element that connects the divine with the earthly. Similarly, in Sufi poetry, Rumi speaks of wine as a metaphor for divine love, an intoxicating force that elevates the soul. These perspectives remind us that alcohol, like any tool, depends on how we use it. The shamans, too, have their warnings. I once met a healer during a trip to New Mexico who spoke of alcohol as the thief of light. He believed it weakened what he called the energetic body, the unseen force that keeps us in balance with the universe. He told me stories of those who had fallen into addiction, describing how their spirits seemed diminished, as if the light within them had been dimmed. These warnings are not meant to frighten us, but to awaken us. They invite us to see alcohol for what it truly is, a powerful force that can both reveal and obscure. It can bring moments of joy and connection, but it can also pull us away from ourselves and the truths we seek. As I sit here now, reflecting on these teachings and the lives I've seen shaped by alcohol, I find myself asking the same question I've asked many times before: what is it that we truly want? Is it the temporary relief, the fleeting joy that alcohol offers? Or is it something deeper? Something that can't be found at the bottom of a glass? The answers, I think, are different for each of us. But the wisdom of the ages is clear: true freedom, true clarity, comes not from escape, but from facing life with an open heart and mind. And perhaps that is the greatest warning of all: not to avoid alcohol out of fear, but to approach it with awareness, understanding the fine line between what it gives and what it takes. In the end, it is not alcohol itself that defines us, but the choices we make when we encounter it. And in those choices, we find not just the measure of the drink, but the measure of ourselves. There's a rhythm to life, isn't there? A natural ebb and flow. Like the tides or the changing seasons. It's a rhythm we all learn to navigate. Some with grace. Others with struggle. But every now and then, something disrupts that rhythm, a storm that throws us off course, leaving us adrift. For many, alcohol becomes both the refuge from that storm and the storm itself. I've seen it happen in others. And I've felt it myself. It begins innocently enough, a drink to celebrate, to unwind, to mark the passing of another day. But over time, what once felt like a choice begins to feel like a necessity. A cycle forms. One that can be hard to recognize until you're deep within it. And by then, the way out can seem impossibly far. There was a man I knew years ago, let's call him Henry. He was a proud man. A builder by trade. Whose hands seemed to carry the strength of the earth itself. But as the years wore on, those hands began to tremble. Not from age, but from the weight of a life he couldn't quite carry anymore. His wife had passed unexpectedly. And with her went the steady rhythm of his days. In her absence, Henry turned to the bottle. First for comfort. Then for escape. At first, it seemed harmless enough, a drink in the evening to quiet the loneliness. But the evenings grew longer. The drink stronger. And before long, alcohol wasn't just part of his life, it was running it. He once told me, "It's not that I want to drink. It's that I don't know how to stop." That line stayed with me. Not because of its sadness, but because of its truth. The cycle of drinking isn't just about the act itself. It's about what drives it, the loneliness, the pain, the desire to escape something that feels too heavy to bear. And yet, the very thing we turn to for relief often deepens the storm, pulling us further from the shore. I remember sitting with Henry one evening, watching as he poured himself another drink. "It helps. You know," he said. His voice quiet. "At least for a little while." I nodded, understanding what he meant. Alcohol has a way of numbing the sharp edges of life. Of making the unbearable seem bearable. If only temporarily. But as I watched Henry, I couldn't help but think of the cost, the mornings of regret. The relationships frayed. The steady erosion of the man he once was. Henry's story is far from unique. Over the years, I've seen many others caught in similar storms. Each one shaped by their own struggles. Their own reasons for reaching for that drink. Some sought solace from grief. Others escaped from stress or anxiety. But beneath it all was a common thread, the cycle of pain and relief. Of escape and return. What fascinates me is how this cycle plays out not just in individuals, but in the broader culture. In our society, alcohol is celebrated and normalized. It's woven into the fabric of our lives. From holidays to sporting events. From weddings to wakes. We raise our glasses in joy and sorrow. Often without questioning why. But beneath this celebration lies a quieter truth. One that many of us know but rarely speak of: the cycle can be hard to break. It's not just the physical pull of addiction. Though that is real and powerful. It's the emotional and psychological ties. The way alcohol becomes a crutch. A companion. A way to fill the voids we all carry. In my own life, I've felt the pull of that cycle. There were times when a drink seemed like the easiest answer to a hard day. When the idea of escape felt more appealing than facing whatever storm was brewing inside me. But over time, I began to see that the relief alcohol offered was an illusion. It dulled the pain. Yes. But it never healed it. And in the quiet moments after, when the drink was gone and the storm remained, I realized that the only way out was through. Breaking the cycle isn't easy. It requires facing the very things we've been trying to avoid: the pain, the fear, the loneliness. It requires honesty. Not just with others, but with ourselves. And it requires support. Because no one should have to navigate these storms alone. As I think back on Henry and the others I've known, I'm reminded of the resilience of the human spirit. For every storm, there is a calm waiting on the other side. For every cycle, there is the possibility of breaking free. It takes time, effort, and no small amount of courage. But it is possible. And perhaps that's the lesson in all of this. The storms we face, the cycles we find ourselves in, they are part of the human experience. But they do not define us. What defines us is how we respond. How we navigate the rough waters and find our way back to ourselves. So as I sit here now, watching the gentle sway of the trees outside my window, I think of Henry. Of the storms he faced. And of the strength it took for him to find his way through. And I wonder, what storms have you weathered? What cycles have you found yourself in? And most importantly, what would it take for you to break free? The answers, I think, are already within you, waiting to be discovered. And perhaps, just perhaps, the first step is recognizing that the storm does not last forever. The rhythm of life continues. And with it comes the chance to start anew. It was a quiet morning in early autumn. The kind where the crisp air seems to carry a clarity that summer never could. I was sitting on a park bench, watching the leaves begin their slow descent, when I noticed an older gentleman walking by. He carried himself with a quiet strength, his steps deliberate, as if each one had purpose. He paused near me, smiled, and said, "The hardest journeys start with the smallest steps." I didn't know what had prompted him to say it. But his words stayed with me. At the time, I was wrestling with my own struggles, trying to untangle years of habits and patterns that no longer served me. The idea of liberation, true freedom from those cycles, felt daunting, almost impossible. But his words reminded me that every path begins somewhere, even if the first step feels small. For many, the journey to freedom from alcohol is just that, a series of small, deliberate steps. It's not about grand declarations or sudden transformations, but about quiet moments of choice. Moments where we ask ourselves what we truly want and what we're willing to do to get there. I've walked this path myself. And I've seen others walk it too. Each journey is unique, shaped by the life that precedes it. But there are common threads, practices, and insights that seem to guide those who seek to break free. One of those practices is stillness. It sounds simple, but in a world that moves so fast, stillness can feel revolutionary. I discovered this in my own life through meditation. At first, it was difficult sitting in silence with nothing but my thoughts. Felt uncomfortable, even unbearable. But over time, I began to see the power in it. In that stillness, I found clarity. I began to understand the emotions and patterns that had driven me for so long. And I realized that I didn't need to escape them, I needed to face them. Nature, too, became a source of healing. I've always believed there's something restorative about being outdoors. About feeling the sun on your face or the wind at your back. During my own journey, I made a habit of walking every morning, letting the rhythm of my steps guide my thoughts. There's a kind of wisdom in the natural world. A reminder that life moves in cycles but always moves forward. Then there's the power of connection. I've learned that no one walks this path alone. In my darkest moments, it was the support of others that kept me going, friends who listened without judgment. A community that understood the struggles I faced. If there's one thing I've come to believe, it's this: the path to liberation is a shared one. We find strength not only in ourselves but in those who walk beside us. But perhaps the most important step is forgiveness. I don't mean the kind we ask of others, but the kind we give to ourselves. For years, I carried guilt for the times I stumbled, for the ways I let myself and others down. It wasn't until I learned to forgive myself that I could truly move forward. As a wise teacher once told me, the wound is where the light enters you. It's through our imperfections that we grow. Of course, none of this is easy. Liberation requires effort, patience, and the willingness to keep going even when the path feels steep. There were days when I wanted to give up, when the idea of change seemed too overwhelming. But in those moments, I reminded myself of something I once read: the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. I think back to that autumn morning, to the man who spoke those words to me. I never saw him again, but his message remains a guidepost in my life. Liberation isn't about reaching some distant destination, it's about the steps we take each day. The choices we make to align with the life we truly want. If you're reading this and feeling the pull of your own cycles, I want you to know that you're not alone. The path may be difficult, but it is also possible. And it begins not with perfection or certainty, but with a single step. A step toward stillness, toward connection, toward forgiveness. A step toward yourself. As the leaves fall and the seasons change, I'm reminded that transformation is a natural part of life. Just as the trees shed their leaves to make way for new growth, we too can let go of what no longer serves us. And in that letting go, we find the space to bloom once more. There's a quiet beauty in the moments after a storm. The air feels cleaner, the sky somehow brighter, as if the world itself has been renewed. I've always thought of those moments as a kind of rebirth, a chance for nature, and for us, to begin again. In many ways, my own journey with alcohol has mirrored that cycle. There was the storm, fierce and unrelenting, when I felt caught in its grip, unsure if I'd ever find my way out. But then came the calm, the moments of clarity and realization that reminded me I was not defined by the storm, but by what I chose to do after it passed. I remember one such moment vividly. It was early spring, and I had just finished a long walk through a nearby park. The trees were beginning to bud, their leaves a tender green that seemed to glow in the afternoon light. As I sat on a bench, watching the world come back to life, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. It wasn't a loud, triumphant feeling, but a quiet, steady one, like the first light of dawn after a long night. That moment marked the beginning of a new chapter for me, a chapter of rebuilding, of rediscovering who I was without the crutch of alcohol. And while it wasn't easy, it was deeply rewarding. In many ways, it felt like a rebirth of the soul. Rebuilding, I've learned, is not about starting over, but about starting from where you are. It's about taking the pieces of your life, even the broken ones, and finding a way to weave them into something new. For me, that meant revisiting the parts of myself I had neglected, the hobbies, the relationships, the dreams I had once cherished but had let slip away. I took up writing again, something I hadn't done since my younger days. At first, the words came slowly, haltingly, as if they weren't quite sure they belonged to me. But over time, The act of putting pen to paper became a kind of therapy. A way to process the emotions I had long buried. Through writing, I found my voice again, a voice that had been drowned out by the noise of the storm. I also reconnected with old friends. People who had stood by me even when I didn't deserve it. One by one, I reached out, apologizing where I needed to, and simply showing up where I could. Those conversations weren't always easy, but they were necessary. They reminded me that while I had lost my way, I had not lost the love and support of those who truly mattered. And then there were the small joys, the simple, everyday moments that I had overlooked for so long. The warmth of the sun on my face. The sound of birdsong in the morning. The taste of a perfectly brewed cup of coffee. These moments, though fleeting, became the foundation of my new life. A reminder that beauty and meaning are often found in the smallest things. But perhaps the most profound part of this rebirth was the sense of connection I began to feel, not just to myself, but to something greater. I started to see my struggles not as failures, but as lessons. As opportunities to grow. I began to understand that the storm, as painful as it had been, had shaped me in ways I couldn't have imagined. It had taught me resilience, compassion, and the importance of living with intention. There's a quote I came across during this time that has stayed with me: "The wound is the place where the light enters you." I don't know who first said it, but it speaks to a truth I've come to believe with all my heart. Our wounds, our struggles, our storms, they are not the end of our story. They are the beginning of something new. Something beautiful. As I sit here now, looking back on that journey, I feel a deep sense of gratitude. Not for the storm itself, but for what it taught me. It showed me that rebirth is possible. That no matter how lost we may feel, there is always a way back to ourselves. To those reading this, I want to share one simple truth: it's never too late. No matter your age, your circumstances, or the weight of your past, there is always room for growth, for change, for renewal. The path may not be easy, but it is worth it. And the first step, as small as it may seem, is the beginning of something extraordinary. Rebirth is not about erasing the past, but about embracing it. It's about finding the courage to move forward, even when the way is unclear. And in that forward movement, we discover not only who we are, but who we are meant to be. So if you find yourself in the aftermath of your own storm, know this: the sun will rise again. The leaves will bud. The flowers will bloom. And the soul, no matter how weary, will find its way back to life. There's a moment in every journey when you stop and look back. Not to dwell on what was, but to see how far you've come. I've had many such moments. Sitting quietly with a cup of tea or walking along a familiar path. The memories rising like distant echoes. They don't come with regret anymore. Instead, they come with a kind of peace, a soft acknowledgement of the shadows I've walked through and the light I've found beyond them. In the end, it's not the shadows that define us. It's how we choose to step out of them. And for me, the journey out of the shadow of alcohol wasn't just about leaving something behind, it was about stepping into something greater. It was about discovering the freedom, clarity, and connection that had always been there, waiting for me. I think often of the people who've walked similar paths, each with their own stories, their own storms. I remember a woman I met at a gathering years ago. She was quiet, reserved, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When we spoke, she told me about her struggles. How she'd spent years lost in the cycle of drinking and regret. I thought I was too old to change, she said. her voice trembling. But then I realized it wasn't too late. It's never too late. Her words stayed with me because they hold a truth that so many of us forget. We often think of change as something for the young. As if the passage of time closes the door to growth. But the reality is, change is always possible. The light is always there. No matter how long we've been in the shadow. As I reflect on my own life, I realize that the greatest gift of this journey has been the connection it has fostered, not just to myself, but to others and to something larger than all of us. I've come to see that we're all part of a greater story. One that we write together with each choice we make. And in that story, every step matters. Every moment of courage. Every act of forgiveness. Every decision to move forward, they all become part of the light that guides us. I remember one evening, sitting with an old friend as we watched the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was ablaze with colors. A reminder of how even endings can be beautiful. My friend turned to me and said, "You know, it's funny. We spend so much of our lives chasing things: success, happiness, freedom, only to realize it was never out there. It was always right here." He tapped his chest, smiling. Right where it's always been. He was right. The light we seek is not something we find, it's something we uncover. It's not in the bottle, or the distractions, or the escapes we so often turn to. It's in the quiet moments, the simple joys, the connections we build. It's in the courage to face ourselves, flaws and all, and to keep moving forward. To those of you reading this, I want to leave you with a question. One that has guided me through many dark moments: what would your life look like if you chose the light? Not the fleeting light of temporary escape, but the steady, enduring light of self-awareness, connection, and purpose. What would it feel like to live with clarity? To walk with intention? To be free? The answer, I think, is different for each of us. But the journey toward that answer is what makes life so remarkable. It's not about perfection or having all the answers. It's about taking one step at a time. Trusting that each step will lead you closer to the life you're meant to live. As I sit here now, with the sun setting once again and the shadows growing long, I feel a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons I've learned. For the people who've walked this path with me. And for the light that continues to guide me. It's not always easy. And the shadows still come from time to time. But they don't frighten me anymore. I've learned that shadows only exist because there is light. And so, I leave you with this: wherever you are in your journey, whatever storms you've weathered or shadows you've faced, know that the light is still there. It's waiting for you. Just as it waited for me. All it takes is a single step. A single choice. To turn toward it. The light beyond the shadow is not a place, it's a way of being. And it's yours to claim. Whenever you're ready.